Season 1 of Stranger Things was a massive hit, and to the shock of absolutely nobody, the show came back for a second season. However, the Stranger Things we got and the Stranger Things we didn't get are two entirely different beasts. Originally, the series was designed as a standalone limited story, you know, like those single season TV events you'd see back in the 80s or 90s, often adapted from a Stephen King novel, but the Duffers had a rough outline in their back pocket just in case Netflix wanted more. One early idea was to jump forward into the 90s, catching up with the kids as much older versions of themselves. Obviously, that would have meant recasting everyone, unless they wanted to wait until the actors were actually in their 20s and off getting married, like they are now for Season 5. Netflix understandably didn't like that idea. As the Duffers put it, "We looked at Stephen King's It and we liked that time jump they made. So we kind of pitched that as a way." And then Netflix was really interested in it as a series, because rightfully so. They were like, "I think people are going to fall in love with these kids. We're going to invest so much time with them. We're going to want to continue our journey with them." And they were right. The other idea? Turning Stranger Things into an anthology series, something more in the vein of American Horror Story than Tales from the Crypt. There isn't a lot of detail about how that would have looked, but it likely would have featured a completely different cast, maybe a new time period, facing a different kind of paranormal threat, but still keeping that slice of nostalgic Americana the show's known for. Maybe they could have called it Tales from the Upside Down. It turns out the series was actually renewed before the first season had even been released. According to Matt Duffer, they greenlit the second season before we even premiered. So when everyone was going, "Is there going to be a second season?" we had been writing it the entire time. So we've been working on this almost all summer. While writing was going on, the Duffers allowed anyone from the writer's room to throw out any crazy ideas they had. Some were used and others weren't. However, what's interesting is that some of the ideas proposed during these writing sessions will actually appear in the 5th and final season. According to Ross Duffer, "But it was way too much. 5 times more ideas than we needed, or 10 times. For Season 5, we're pulling from a lot of those big Season 2 ideas. A lot of our big ending stuff was pulled from stuff that we thought was going to be in Season 2. What was taken from those Season 2 writing sessions for Season 5 is unknown, but there have been talks of revisiting various things from throughout the series. Let's just hope they're not planning on revisiting everything."
Dig deeper. Your whole life you've been lied to.
Like with Season 1, the goal for Season 2 was to write it as one complete story. Something that could complement and maybe cap off what they started with Season 1, and something that could also stand on its own. Whether that was successful or not, we'll get to. But the Duffers saw Season 2 not really as a follow-up season, but more like a typical 80s or 90s movie sequel. This is why Stranger Things 2 is just called Stranger Things 2. Their intention was for it to feel like an extension of the first. Think Aliens to Alien. Netflix was a bit cautious with this approach because they felt most movie sequels were often seen as being inferior or had a bad rep. However, the Duffers assured them that some movie sequels are considered on par or even better than the original, like Aliens or Terminator 2 for example, although I'm one of the few that think both Alien and the original Terminator are actually the better films. Also, I'm not really sure why they were worried about this at all. Did most people that watched this show even get that they were going for the classic sequel angle instead of a Season 2? I never heard anyone say, "Hey, are you watching Stranger Things 2? No, most people said, "Are you watching Stranger Things Season 2? I don't think people see television the same way they do film. Anywho, even though most of Season 2 had already been written before Season 1 premiered, the Duffers took the reaction to the first season and made some adjustments. Now what those adjustments were, I don't know, but I'm assuming Barb's death was a big factor, since it becomes a major motivation for Nancy throughout all of Season 2. With writing in the bag, now came time for casting. Joining the town of Hawkins are Max, played by Sadie Sink, the new girl in town who some of the boys have a little crush on, mostly because of her amazing dig-dug skills. Her stepbrother Billy, played by Dacre Montgomery, who is pretty much a complete psychopath. Then you have Bob Newby, played by Sean Astin, who of course we all know best for his brief appearance in the Corey Feldman music video, Ascension Millennium. He plays Joyce's new boyfriend and is basically the polar opposite of her ex-husband. Lastly, we have Paul Reiser as Dr. Owens, the new head of Hawkins' lab, and his inclusion is very interesting considering the direction the season takes. The main focus of the story is once again centered all around Will. As we previously saw at the end of Season 1, the Upside Down isn't quite done with him, causing him to vomit up parasitic slugs and see into the Upside Down. Although was it a slug he coughed up, or a baby fluke man? Will is having what seems to be almost PTSD flashbacks to what happened, but it's actually this giant shadow monster that's trying to take him over. As explained at one point, Will is somehow stuck in between our world and the Upside Down, and these flashes he's seeing are coined now memories, which is one of the dumbest things the show introduces.
There are now memories happening all at once now.
Can you describe these now memories?
Not the visions themselves, but the term now memories. It feels like something a 5-year-old child would have thought up, not kids that are 12 years old? Anyways, Will gets possessed by the shadow monster, and that's basically the setup for the remainder of the season, though it did take 3 episodes to get to this point, whereas in the first season, Will is abducted within the first 5 minutes. Again, Will isn't so much of a character as he is a prop to keep the show moving forward. Most of the time when he's talking, it's the shadow monster that's speaking through him. Though there are times where it seems Will does break through for a second, the shadow monster itself is kind of awesome. It actually sort of reminds me of these nightmares I had as a kid. For at least a decade, I would have these nightmares about this shadow. This formless entity that would always chase me and eventually devour me whole. It didn't make any sound, it didn't really have any discernible shape, it was just darkness and it was hungry. The shadow monster would eventually be renamed to the Mind Flayer by Dustin, which as explained in the show is a creature from Dungeons and Dragons with psionic powers. It's also very much inspired by the H.P. Lovecraft creation Cthulhu. Will's whole storyline this season plays out like The Exorcist, from his possession and the medical treatments to the eventual exorcism that drives the beast from his body. I just couldn't help but think of young Reagan as she tells a group of partygoers that they're all gonna die.
He likes it cold.
With Will's possession, this sort of sets his mom Joyce on a similar path as the first season. However, instead of hanging Christmas lights everywhere to communicate, she hangs Will's drawings all over the house. Eventually, we learn that it's basically a map of tunnels created by the Upside Down that are spreading and killing everything they touch. It does feel very similar to what they had her do in the first season, and you really do start to get that feeling of familiarity, like we've all seen this before. Joyce this go around is a lot more protective of her son, and considering what happened in season 1, it's not hard to understand why. She is a little bit of a helicopter parent, asking Jonathan to take his brother trick-or-treating, even though the boys are at that age where they'd probably rather be with their friends than a parent or a sibling. Can we briefly talk about the Halloween aspect in the first few episodes? I love Halloween, which is definitely not a secret on this channel, but there's just something about those old 80s Halloween decorations that make me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Like these classic blow molds. You have no idea what I would do to get my hands on these things. But at the same time, I think the costumes are a little too good. Like the boys' Ghostbusters costumes. Now these are apparently homemade costumes. I mean, the proton packs and Dustin's trap definitely are, though the flight suits look a little too clean. What I love the most though is the Duffers actually went to Ghostbusters director Ivan Reitman and Dan Aykroyd, who wrote and starred in the film, for permission. According to Matt Duffer, Reitman said it was flattering. He read the scripts, he had seen the first season, or at least had heard of it, or pretended like he had, but they were really into being part of the show. Then they sent us all these Ghostbusters toys at the end of the shoot. That's one of my top 5 most worn out VHS tapes. Me too, bud, me too. Dan Aykroyd was also asked about appearing in the show and said, "Anything's possible, but I don't think they need me or any of the Ghostbusters from the movie. They're all doing really well with their stories and they're beautifully shot, beautifully written, and I've been enjoying." I think it's one thing to have Sean Astin pop up or Paul Reiser, who were both in prominent 80s movies, but if Dan Aykroyd just randomly showed up while the boys were wearing Ghostbusters costumes, or even if they weren't, it would have been such an obvious wink that I think it would have taken people right out of the moment. You've got to be careful when you have a show that's whole existence rests on pop culture nostalgia. While the boys are out busting pretend ghosts, Hopper on the other hand is dealing with a rot that's festering just under the town. From the very first episode, farmers in Hawkins notice their entire pumpkin patches beginning to rot. Hilariously, they blame each other, thinking someone's poisoning their crops, but it turns out the gate beneath Hawkins' lab isn't just growing, it's spreading, infecting and killing everything around it. Hopper even digs down into one of these tunnels created by the leak and nearly gets himself killed in the process. One thing that immediately stood out to me was the casting of Paul Reiser. Look, I've seen the first 3 Alien movies literally hundreds of times, but when I saw Reiser's name in the opening credits, I instantly got suspicious. His character Burke in Aliens is one of the biggest piles of shit in movie history, so I figured, oh yeah, he's gonna be the villain. But surprisingly, he's not. He might be a little bureaucratic, but unlike Dr. Brenner, he actually does seem to care. For instance, as the series goes on, we learn the Mind Flayer is something of a hive mind, meaning anyone or anything under its control feels what it feels. So whenever the lab tries to burn the creeping growths spreading from the gate, Will feels it. Literally, it starts burning him alive. At one point, Dr. Owens is with the other scientists, and they explain they'll need to start the burn, even if it means Will dies. Owens is the only one to object, because for him, killing Will just isn't an option. Had this been Dr. Brenner, he probably would have lit the match himself. The show did a good job of flipping my expectations here, because I kept waiting for Owens to sell Will out to some bioweapons company. Instead, he actually works with Hopper to figure out what's killing the crops, though he does need a little persuading.
No.
I keep things nice and quiet for you. And you keep your shit out of my town.
Hopper isn't just dealing with dying crops, but also a newly returned 11. It wasn't exactly a secret that she'd be coming back. I mean, they teased it at the end of season 1, but the way she returns almost feels like she's being birthed by the Upside Down, which is kind of gross. I like how much of her return though is shown through brief flashbacks, living alone in the woods, hiding from the cops, killing for food, just trying to survive. When Hopper finds her, it quickly becomes a father-daughter dynamic. He does whatever he can to protect her, hiding her in a cabin deep in the woods that no one else seems to know about. It's sweet, but it also causes a lot of frustration for Eleven, who just wants to see her friends, especially Mike. Hopper's only trying to keep her safe until it's clear she won't be hunted, but still, not letting her go out for Halloween? Come on! She was literally going to wear a sheet. How would anyone know it's her? Then again, Hopper walking around town with a random kid on Halloween night might raise a few eyebrows, considering his actual daughter isn't exactly among the living. This whole storyline is really about Hopper trying to make up for the daughter he lost. It mirrors what he went through saving Will in season 1, and that's sort of the theme this season. A lot of repeated emotional beats. Not necessarily bad, but it does lead to a bit of deja vu. With 11 back, it's not just about seeing her friends again, it's about discovering who she is. This leads to her finding a box conveniently labeled Hawkins' lab just under the floorboards, giving her everything she needs to track down her mother, Terry Ives, the woman we last saw in a waking coma back in season 1. 11 reaches her in the only way that she can, through the void, and discovers she's not alone. There's another girl like her, a sister. But before we get to that dumpster fire, let's talk about Dustin and Dart. At the end of episode 2, Dustin finds something squirming in his garbage, a tadpole, slug-type creature that's very fond of Three Musketeer bars, hence the name Dart, short for D'Artagnan from the Three Musketeers. Now, could this be the same thing Will coughed up at the end of season 1? Highly unlikely since that happened a year earlier, so this one would be probably a bit bigger by now, but is it the same kind of creature? Oh, absolutely. Dustin bonds with it, unaware that his cute little science project is about to turn into a literal nightmare pet. The thing rapidly grows, shedding skin and transforming into what the group calls a demo dog, basically an early stage of the Demogorgon. Imagine being 12 years old and having a baby monster as your pet. This leads to Dustin crossing paths with Steve, who helps him deal with his new pet problem. Steve's evolution from douchey boyfriend to oblivious boyfriend to full-blown babysitter might honestly be one of my favorite arcs in the entire show. He and Dustin have amazing chemistry. I could easily watch a spin-off with these two going on weird monster hunting adventures. The reason Steve's hanging out with middle schoolers now is because his relationship with Nancy has crashed and burned. Nancy's still reeling from Barb's death, shocked that everyone else seems to have moved on, while her best friend was brutally killed by a monster. No one knows the truth, and what happened to Barb is still a mystery to the public, but Nancy carries this guilt that won't let her rest until the truth is out. That rift between her and Steve only grows, because he doesn't share that same need for justice. He didn't know Barb and he just wants to move on. That pushes Nancy toward Jonathan, who's dealing with his own survivor's guilt. His brother came back, sure, but Will hasn't been the same, and Jonathan feels like he failed to protect him. Together they set out to expose Hawkins' lab, which they kind of sort of do, when Dr. Owens admits the lab was responsible for Barb's death. Unbeknownst to him, Nancy records the whole thing and shares it with a conspiracy theorist named Murray. Think of Murray as what would happen if Fox Mulder got fired from the X-Files and started freelancing out of his basement with a bottle of vodka.
Oh.
This entire subplot feels like a response to the whole Justice for Barb thing that blew up after season 1. Even Shannon Purser, who played Barb, got an Emmy nomination for her role, which kind of feels like something that happened because of fan support, more so than her limited screen time. I'm not saying she was bad, she was just barely in it. Murray himself is an interesting addition, eccentric sure, but tonally, he doesn't quite fit the rest of the show. He's supposed to be funny, but I mostly find him to be grating. Although I will admit, when he calls out Nancy and Jonathan's will they won't they dynamic, it did get a laugh out of me.
So, Jonathan, how was the pullout?
One thing that bugs me about Nancy though, she leaves Steve, sleeps with Jonathan, and then when she sees Steve helping the kids, she gives him this look like, oh, I didn't know you had good dad instincts. It feels like suddenly she regrets her choice, like maybe she backed the wrong horse. Jonathan isn't the only buyers getting a little love, because Joyce has a new man in Bob Newby. Bob is basically the adult version of Will. What's kind of funny though is that Bob accidentally causes Will's possession. Trying to relate to Will, he tells this story about conquering his nightmares, standing up to the monster in his dreams. So when Will tries the same thing, instead of conquering the monster conquers him. Bob meant well, but man did he screw that one up. Still, he's a likable guy, but maybe a little too likable. From the moment he's introduced, you can tell he's this season's Barb, the nice, kind character destined for a gruesome end. Because let's face it, none of the main cast is dying anytime soon. That's one of the show's big problems. It's afraid to put major characters in real danger. You always know someone's gonna swoop in and save the day. So when a new face shows up, odds are they won't be around for the finale. And unfortunately for Bob, it's his turn on the chomping block. The new additions, Max and Billy, don't really add much to the story. Max mostly exists for Dustin and Lucas to crush on, though Lucas ultimately wins her over, while Billy's just a violent psychopath whose only communication style is punching. You could remove either of them and it wouldn't really change much. It's clear they were introduced for the future and not so much for this story. And that sort of undercuts the Duffers' whole movie sequel approach. If you're planning setups for future installments, you're not making Aliens, you're making a TV show. So with all the plot lines converging, Nancy and Jonathan exposing the lab, Steve and the kids fighting demodogs, Hopper in the tunnels, Joyce dealing with Will's possession, the show decides to slam the brakes and give us one of the strangest bottle episodes I've ever seen. I don't know what the thinking was, but the Lost Sister is basically Eleven's side quest, a detour where she goes looking for her sister. When she finds her, it turns out this sister and her band of outcasts are a group of murderous vigilantes who kill anyone who ever wronged them. It nearly pushes Eleven down the same path, but thankfully she realizes maybe revenge murders aren't the best form of therapy. Yes, Callie, or 8, helps her focus her powers, but she's no Yoda to Eleven's Luke. Matt Duffer had this to say about the Lost Sister. Whether it works for people or not, it allows us to experiment a little bit. It's important for Ross and I to try stuff and not feel like we're doing the same thing over and over again. It's almost like doing a whole other little pilot episode in the middle of your season, which is kind of a crazy thing to do, but it was really fun to write and cast and work on. Well, I'm glad they had fun experimenting, but as a viewer, it wasn't fun to watch. The general consensus is that the episode just doesn't work. Some even called it one of the worst episodes of television ever, which, to be fair, probably means they have never seen the X-Files Season 7 episode Fight Club.
Oh my god! How did you do that?
Matt's right that it feels like a pilot for a spin-off. The problem is, none of the characters are likable. The episode ends with Eleven realizing she's needed back home with her friends, but it raises the question, why keep her away from them for so long to begin with? The chemistry between the kids is what makes this show, but isolating her just so she can have this big hero moment feels like the last time she was separated and had this big hero moment. But if Season 2 has one big thematic problem, it's the hive mind logic. The Mind Flayer is supposed to control everything from the upside down. Demodogs, tendrils, the vines, even Will himself. And yet the show isn't totally consistent with how strong that control actually is. Take Will for example. Even while possessed, he still manages to break free for a few seconds at a time, tapping Morse code, warning his mom. So clearly the Mind Flayer's grip can slip in our world. and that makes Dart's behavior actually kind of plausible. Yeah, the Hive mind is supposed to unify the Demodogs, but Dart imprinted on Dustin early on. There's a very real pet and owner relationship there. It suggests these creatures aren't just mindless drones. They can form attachments and act independently under the right circumstances. Plus, the Demodogs themselves feel like they're straight out of the 90s. They remind me of the Shriekers from Tremors 2, running around, hunting in packs, moving with this raptor-like attitude. And speaking of raptors, the Demodogs definitely have shades of Jurassic Park in their behavior. Considering this has Spielbergian influences, it doesn't surprise me that the Duffers would dip their toes in the 90s as well. But if there's one inconsistency that really drives me nuts in the finale, it's the gunplay. Earlier in the season, and especially during Bob's death, we see bullets treated as a mere inconvenience for the Demodogs. Hopper is unloading with his rifle and it does basically nothing. These things shrug off gunfire like they're wearing Kevlar made of nightmare flesh. But then in the finale, suddenly Hopper's same rifle is mowing them down like they're made of wet cardboard. And when he switches to a shotgun, it's like he's playing Doom on I'm Too Young to Die. It just feels extremely convenient. I get that it's a big season finale and the heroes need to survive, but the rules kind of shift depending on the scene. It's a little frustrating, especially since the show is usually so good about creature logic. Eventually everything comes together. 11 heads underground with Hopper to close the gate. Joyce is busy performing an upside-down themed exorcism on Will, and the kids are trying not to get eaten by the Demodogs in the tunnels. The climax itself is basically season 1 again. 11 screaming, hands shaking, massive psychic energy blast, big glowing portal. It's cool, but it's familiar. After the smoke clears, Owens, who could have easily been set up as the new Brenner, ends up helping out Hopper instead. He gives 11 an official birth certificate and essentially makes Hopper her father on paper as well as emotionally. It's genuinely sweet and one of the few clear victories in the season. We even get justice for Barb. Her parents finally get some closure. Though weirdly, Bob doesn't get a funeral. I mean, the guy died saving everyone and nobody even gives him a gravestone or a eulogy? Poor Bob deserved better than that. The season winds down with the snowball, which is probably one of the best scenes Stranger Things has ever done. Dustin shows up with his Farrah Fawcett hair, following Steve's very sincere advice on how to impress the ladies. I love the Steve and Dustin dynamic. Steve basically turns into the world's most chaotic older brother, and Dustin just adores him. And while Dustin gets rejected over and over, Nancy steps in and dances with him, telling him he's her favorite among Mike's friends. It's a sweet moment, and honestly it tracks with Dustin having a little crush on her. He did offer her pizza in one of the first scenes of the entire show, which, if you're a young boy crushing on your friend's older sister, is basically a marriage proposal. But the sweetness doesn't last long, because in true Stranger Things fashion, the camera pans out, flips upside down, and we see the Mind Flayer looming over the school like a vengeful 80-foot tall fart cloud. And just like that, we're reminded that the upside down isn't going anywhere. Looking back, Season 2 really is the definition of the traditional 80s sequel. Bigger, louder, and familiar to a fault. The Duffers said they wanted it to feel like an 80s movie follow-up, and in that sense, I guess they nailed it. It's the Ghostbusters 2 of Stranger Things. The same thing, just not quite as good. Despite the critical praise and huge viewership, this is also where cracks started to show. The Nielsen numbers dropped steadily across the season, and some fans felt the magic fading. In hindsight, the tone shift and repetition made it feel less like a contained story and more like a setup for something much bigger. Personally, I still enjoy Season 2. It's cinematic, full of great character moments, and it keeps the heart of what makes Stranger Things work. But it's also the moment where the show stopped being a weird little Spielberg meets King crossover and started becoming a franchise. The upside was bigger stakes. The downside was losing some of that small town mystery charm that made the first season feel so special. But while Season 2 tried to be a movie sequel, Season 3 would try something very different. The Duffers would lean hard into spectacle, into neon, into big blockbuster energy, and depending on who you ask, they either supercharged the franchise or completely jumped the shark.